introduce the folks that are up here with me today, who are part of the team that's working on these cases. You'll be hearing some remarks from them as well. My co-counsel, Paul Galln, longtime attorney here in Oregon, experienced in representing folks who are abused in custody, in Oregon State custody, especially foster care, as well as inmate injuries and death. And my co-counsel, attorney Kevin Hart-Spinella from my office, who has a public defense background before joining our firm, has worked hard to represent the interests of those who are criminally accused and incarcerated. On these cases with us, also not present today, is some colleagues out of New York at the Levy-Konigsberg law firm, who's a national leader in these cases. And so I'm going to make some remarks. Paul and Kendall will make some remarks. We're going to talk about the new case that we filed, its significance, some of the larger trends, and then we will have a question and answer. Well, we're here today to announce the filing of a new $51 million lawsuit against the state of Oregon on behalf of 10 victims who were sexually abused while they were in custody of Oregon Youth Authority. All of our clients were in custody at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility. And for those who are maybe not familiar, McLaren is a youth correctional facility operated by the Oregon Youth Authority. It's located in Woodburn, Oregon. All of our clients in today's lawsuit were juvenile detainees when they were sexually abused at McLaren and while they were in the custody of Oregon Youth Authority. The Oregon Youth Authority's stated purpose is to provide youth with treatment, education, and guidance, and to do so in a safe and supportive environment. And that is not what happened to the 10 victims that we represent in today's lawsuit, or the hundreds of other victims that we're going to be talking about as well. I'd like to talk briefly about McLaren, just as some background. McLaren, as I mentioned, is located in Woodburn. It is what they call a close custody correctional facility. It houses youth offenders who are as young as 12 years old. It's operated by the Oregon Youth Authority. And according to the Oregon Youth Authority statistics, throughout its history, McLaren has housed up to 300 children at any given time. This is a photo of the exterior of the McLaren building. We also, I think, have a photo of some of the setup inside of McLaren. Our lawsuit today, it contains allegations for the first time about the sexual abuse of these 10 boys, and we believe and suspect many other boys, by the individual who was the main doctor at the McLaren Youth Facility. And we're identifying that individual for the first time today. That doctor was Dr. Edward Gary Edwards. And Dr. Edwards, as you'll see in the lawsuit, his abuse of boys at McLaren was so prolific that he was known amongst boys and staff as Dr. Coldfingers. He was the primary medical provider at McLaren, and according to records that we've obtained from McLaren, he was involved in managing the health of youth at McLaren from 1977 until at least 2007 or 2008. And at one point, he was named the chief medical officer at McLaren. Our clients have alleged in this lawsuit, and we intend to prove, and we believe the evidence will show, that Dr. Edwards' sexual abuse was so notorious that even staff referred to him as Dr. Coldfingers, and multiple of our clients will testify in this lawsuit that they made numerous reports about the abuse by Dr. Edwards to other McLaren staff, including in the later years, some making reports through the OYA abuse hotline. And our clients will testify, and you will hear, that McLaren McLaren corrections officers and staff who received those reports ignored them. And worse than that, we allege in this lawsuit that at times the McLaren staff weaponized Dr. Edwards' abuse of youth. And by that we mean when one of our clients' behavior wasn't to the staff liking, they would threaten them that, hey, if you don't get in line, we're going to send you to see Dr. Coldfingers. We intend to prove in this case that our clients were treated as throwaway kids and that their safety and welfare was disregarded because of their past criminal infractions. And the purpose of this case and the other cases we're going to be talking about is to make it clear that all children deserve protection from abuse. The repeated sexual exploitation of helpless children in the custody of the Oregon Youth Authority is a stain on our state's conscience. Our lawsuit details the abuse that our clients suffered by Dr. Coldfingers. They were all abused between approximately 2000 and 2008. But as you have heard, and as we will prove, Dr. Edwards was there from 1977 until at least 2008. All of our clients were young boys when this abuse started. Many were as young as 12 when the abuse started. Some were as old as 16. And the abuse unfolded in the same way each time. They would go to Dr. Edwards for an appointment for purported medical treatment, and instead of treatment, they would be sexually abused. One example that we allege in the complaint, one of our clients went to Dr. Edwards for a sore throat. And for his sore throat, he had his genitals fondled by Dr. Edwards for minutes with ungloved hands. In the lawsuit, you'll read about the allegations that are consistent across our clients that this doctor would grope their testicles and their penises without gloves, and that in many instances that led to him masturbating them, and in some instances that led to him penetrating their anuses with his fingers. And almost all of our clients were abused on numerous occasions in this way by this doctor. And we have also alleged, and we'll prove in this case, that for victims like our clients, victims of abuse at OIA, their suffering does not end when they leave custody. Their suffering didn't end when they finally got to get away from this doctor. Instead, many of them are still coming to terms with the long-term impacts that this abuse has had on them. Severe emotional distress, mental health issues, substance abuse, and really consistently, and I think notably, a loss of trust in authority figures. And for some of them, that's had a particularly insidious impact because their loss of trust is heightened when it comes to medical or psychological treatment. And so not only were they hurt, but their ability to seek help and seek healing has been severely hindered by the abuse that they suffered in this context. Some of our clients, as we've alleged in the complaint, don't go to the doctor, or when they do, they will refuse to see anyone other than a female medical provider, and they avoid treatment as often as possible. We also don't want to lose sight of the fact that this complaint, although the commonality between our clients is the abuse by this doctor, multiple of our clients were also abused by another perpetrator. And we have identified, well, we've alleged abuse by 5 other staffers. So you have these boys who are being sexually abused by this doctor, and then they're also being sexually abused by another corrections officer or another staffer at McLaren. And that's very consistent with the psychological literature on sexual abuse, where the levels of re-victimization, if you're victimized once, 50% of people who are victimized will be victimized by another person. Well, we want to talk a little bit about the significance of today's lawsuit, both in and of itself and in the broader picture. To our knowledge, this is the largest of this type of lawsuit ever brought against Oregon Youth Authority. And unfortunately, we believe the abuse of our clients by this doctor is only the tip of the iceberg. This doctor was in charge of intake exams at McLaren, which means that he had a reason to be alone with every single child that came through McLaren during those 40 plus years of service. And at nearly 300 youth there, housed there at any given time by 40 years, that means this doctor had an opportunity to abuse more than 10,000 children in Oregon custody. And so for that reason, we believe there are many other victims of this perpetrator who are out in our community. We also believe this lawsuit is significant and representative of a growing national movement to bring justice to incarcerated youth who have been sexually abused. There have been large lawsuits brought in a number of other states over the last year. There's a national conversation developing. In recent months, our team has been contacted by nearly 200 people who report that they suffered sexual abuse as children while they were in detention facilities in Oregon. And so today's lawsuit on behalf of our team is the start of a series of cases that we intend to bring to shine a light on a decades-long systemic problem of the abuse of adjudicated youth in Oregon. Just to share, we can skip ahead a little bit here. Just to share a little bit about what we're hearing from other youth who are contacting us. As I mentioned, we've been contacted by nearly 200 victims of various sexual abuse by various individuals in OIA. Many of those are as young as 12 years old when the abuse began. We're hearing from individuals who were abused between 1999 and as late as 2022. And this involves abuse at all of the various OIA correctional facilities, Oak Creek, McLaren, all of them. Go to the next slide. We're also hearing about abuse that involves all types of different staffers at OIA. We're getting reports of abuse by correctional officers, kitchen staff, living unit managers, but also some of the most also some of the most trusted individuals in these settings. All of these facilities have schools embedded. We're hearing reports about the teachers in those schools. We're hearing reports about sexual abuse by mental health providers and other doctors and other medical providers beyond the case that we filed today. We're also hearing dozens of the individuals telling us that they reported the sexual abuse that they suffered while they were in OIA. And we're also hearing from many of these victims that, to their knowledge, nothing meaningful was done when they reported about their abuse to OIA. As it happens, there's breaking news today of thousands and thousands of abuse reports not being properly handled by OIA just in the last 7 years. And I wish we could say that surprised us, but based on what we're hearing, we think that's just the tip of the iceberg. We think this is a problem that has probably impacted tens of thousands of children in OIA's history. And it's certainly consistent with what we're hearing from nearly 200 people who have contacted our team. So today is a starting place. It is the first in what will be a series of litigation that we will be bringing against the state of Oregon, against the Oregon Youth Authority. And our clients are deeply concerned about the safety of children that are in Oregon State custody today and in the future. And so we believe this is an important moment for both the victims of abuse in OIA custody and also for our state. It is a watershed moment in the fight for the protection of vulnerable children against the scourge of sexual exploitation by trusted adults. And there are thousands of victims around this country right now that are lending their voices to this effort. And we, on our team, are very proud to be leading the charge for victims of historical abuse within the Oregon Youth Authority. But we also believe that this is a decision point moment for the state of Oregon. Our state's current leaders have a choice to make. Will they continue the historical approach of ignoring or minimizing the abuse of youth in their custody? Or will they take the opportunity to look at the truth, accept responsibility for the abuse of the past, make meaningful amends to the victims, and work with survivors to help ensure that vulnerable youth in state custody are safe today and going forward in the future? I'd like to turn the podium over to my colleague, Paul Golm. He has a few comments that he'd like to offer.
And I'll be brief because Peter really has covered most of why we're here today. But he's right. We allege and intend to prove on behalf of our 10 clients in this case that they were knowingly subjected to child sex abuse by adults in position of trust and authority. And that's really key here, because those positions of trust and authority in part allow those perpetrators to take advantage of these kids. We believe the evidence will show that the abuse was preventable, that other adults within OYA turned a blind eye to the abuse. After all, you don't get a horrific nickname like Dr. Coldfingers unless it's pretty pervasive in terms of everyone knowing about it, by the staff and by the kids who were detained there. Yet, from what we can tell and what the evidence shows, nothing was done. You have to understand, too, that when these kids came into OYA authority, they were already traumatized. Maybe they had been subjected to some abuse by family or others, but they come into OYA, they've been traumatized, and we as a society have been told that OYA will rehabilitate them, will help them, will support them, and get them to a better place when they leave. But instead what happens is they're abused and they leave in a worse position than when they went into OYA in the first place. And it's this history of trauma, too, that makes them in part vulnerable when they walk into OYA. And we think the evidence is going to show that the staff who committed these crimes knew about it, and they took advantage of that fact. The bottom line really is that abuse of incarcerated youth is too common, both here and we think across the country. And as Peter mentioned, it's part of this growing trend to unearth all the abuse that has happened at facilities similar to those that OYA has authority over. But again, going back to when talking about these kids, and I forgot to mention this, we also have to remember that when these kids did come into OYA, they were stripped of their rights, they were stripped of their ability to protect themselves. And as mentioned, that's what the predatory staff took advantage of. And the worst part of it too is these kids are abused by staff, and then they think to themselves that they can't really tell anybody because nobody's gonna believe them. And what we're finding out today with the news report that broke as well is even those who did tell people weren't believed or it wasn't investigated anyway. And that's the problem, and that's the systemic flaw that we hope to start to get at with this lawsuit going forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As Peter mentioned, I have a background in public defense, and I bring that with me into this work. This is a population that's very near and dear to my heart. One of the most important things that I learned in my time as a public defender is, as Paul said, so many of these people come into the criminal legal system already victims of intense trauma and abuse, even at such a young age, of these people that we're representing. Then often our solution is just to lock them up and subject them to more abuse and more trauma. Unfortunately, as Paul said, abuse of incarcerated folks is far more common than we care to acknowledge or even know. And I think that's because we so often fail to listen to these individual stories and their experiences because they are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people. I hope that these lawsuits and the bravery of our clients stepping forward will help us listen to their stories and begin to bring some change to this broken system. Thank you.
Those are our prepared remarks. We're happy to take questions, do our best to answer those.
Is anybody facing criminal charges over any of this that you know?
For our case that we filed here today, there have not been, to our knowledge, any criminal charges in the past, and we actually learned as we were preparing to file this case that the doctor passed away in the last couple of weeks. So he will not be facing any repercussions for his conduct.
Is the statute of limitations passed, or is that something you guys could see for those other staffers that you guys are listing?
Certainly, it hasn't passed for all of them, and you know, I think we saw the sentence criminal prosecution of a OIA abuser just in the last couple of weeks here. So there's certainly precedent for pressing charges and moving forward, and our goal with the folks that are contacting us is to do everything we can to identify who those abusers are, and we'll be working with our clients to make that information available and make reports to allow criminal prosecutions if they're able to proceed.
If the abuse happened back in 2000, 2008, we're 17 years past the latest. I'm just, can you speak to why now and how long it took to kind of get to this point?
Sure. I think, well, one, the national statistics that are available say that for child sexual abuse, the average age of a first disclosure is 52 years old. It's a very commonly and well-established statistic. So we're well within, all of our clients are under 40 years old. They're well within the norm of when people ever come forward. And the reality is, for people who have suffered sexual abuse, it often takes many years to start to put together that the abuse that happened when they were a kid is still with them when they're 30 years old, 35 years old, 40 years old. You have the bad experience, the horrible experience of the abuse when it happens, but many victims report to us that they sort of think, okay, that's over, I'm gonna move on with my life, I'm not gonna think about that, that's something in the past, I'll be okay. And what they find over time, especially with major milestones like getting married or finding a partner, having a child, they have these developmental milestones and realize that I'm not over this. This isn't behind me. This is still causing me problems right now. And Oregon law recognizes that phenomenon in regards to statute of limitations and gives people the opportunity to bring claims after they realize that, hey, that thing that happened way back then, it's causing me problems now. So it's well within the norm of what we see with child sexual abuse.
Can I just add something too, Peter? With these clients, there's an added layer.
Do you mind?
Yeah, sorry, I apologize.
No, you're good.
I told him before.
Can you tell I'm a newbie at this? With our clients, there's an added layer here too, I think. With any victim of sexual abuse, there's a concern that no one's going to believe them. And here you have people who are incarcerated. And so now they think, why would they believe me when I was incarcerated particularly? So for them to come forward is a big leap in faith, to be honest. And so we're certainly not surprised by it being 17 years, as you mentioned, that we get to this point.
Yeah, that's well said. Why don't you stay here? Do you want to join too?
You mentioned 5 other staffers. Are any of these staff still employed with OA?
We're still trying to determine that as some of these other staffers. Part of the difficulty is the dynamics of kids that are incarcerated is it's a very traumatic scenario, and they don't always have a lot of information about the adults that they're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. And so for a number of our clients, some of these other individuals are hard for them to identify. So we'll be using the discovery process to make sure we get the names of the people that they would have been interacting with, and we can identify these individuals, and we will absolutely work to make sure that if any have access to youth, that we do everything we can to remove that access.
Did they contact you, or did you guys put, I guess how did this kind of get started?
Well, what's happening, what we're seeing is there's sort of this snowballing effect of there have been lawsuits in Maryland, there have been lawsuits in Illinois, there's a big lawsuit going on in Washington, and people are starting to see the news and they're realizing, hey, I wasn't alone. This isn't just a one-off thing that happened to me. This is a problem. This is a trend. And then they're reaching out for help and saying, hey, that happened to me too. I want to make sure kids today are safer in Oregon Youth Authority.
So to clarify, did these people reach out to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Well, our team. We have
Yeah.
3 law firms. Yeah. Right.
And have you done any call-outs or sought any additional victims since starting this investigation?
We have one of our partners has been making sure that people are aware, has a public awareness campaign going on, and we're trying to make sure people know that there are attorneys out here who specialize in this work and that are willing to listen to them and willing to look into these situations.
And in terms of Dr. Edwards' death, do you know anything more about the circumstances of that death, or?
We don't. We literally just learned that as we were getting ready for this process, and we know he was at this point, I think in his 80s. But that's as much as we know at this point.
So you guys weren't able to contact him, talk to him, propose anything like that, because they hadn't got to that point yet?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
There's some things, it says, I was trying to find where I just saw it, but some of the victims had reported this as recently I was seeing as 2010 to the OIA hotline. Do you know, was anything done? Did anybody report this and have any follow-up from OIA? I mean, how many of these victims did report, and what was the response from OIA?
Certainly multiple of our clients will testify that they reported in various ways, whether through the hotline later or at the time to correctional guards. And across the board, they all will testify no meaningful action was taken. They weren't aware of anything being done. They didn't see any change in this doctor's status or access to kids while they were there.
And didn't hear anything back from OIA, or it was just into a void kind of thing?
Yes, correct.
I just wanted to comment, we got an update from OIA, and they're sharing progress on their professional standards office to improve that and ensure youth reporting in that investigation process remaining accessible. Obviously, this wouldn't apply to the victims in this case, but I guess just a comment on them sharing this now.
Well, the reporting I'm seeing today is that they are being called to task for failing to investigate and failing to respond to thousands of reports in the last 7 years. So that's very concerning to us. It's very concerning to our clients. And unfortunately, with what we're hearing directly from victims, it appears to be a long-time practice and trend from the Oregon Youth Authority.
And I understand that you're in the early stages, you're just filing this now, so still a lot of discovery to come, but from what you've learned so far and what we know about OIA and some of these situations still today, do you have any sense of what needs to happen to fix this system? What can be done at the political level, at the administrative level, to actually protect these youths?
Yeah, it is early stages, and we are going to be giving that a lot of thought. That's our client's primary concern. I would say, from what we're hearing, OIA needs to embrace a culture that cares about abuse and responds to abuse. You have to really care as an organization. That will do more than a policy in a notebook on a shelf. Policies are important. They need to be there, and we need to have good policies. But when you see these reports about thousands of abuse reports not being investigated, or you hear directly from folks like our clients who made reports and nothing happened. What you see is a culture that doesn't take abuse seriously enough. And the problem is that sexual predators are dynamic. They operate in systems and they watch at what's going on around them. And if they see that they can operate without anyone cracking down on them, and they see that staff members are using a nickname that refers to their proclivities, and they see that reports aren't going anywhere, that emboldens them, and they abuse more, and they abuse more severely. So the culture at OIA needs to change.
One more quick, you had mentioned plans to file suits in the coming months. Is there any details or anything you can share right now about what we can expect to see about that?
Other than sort of what we shared about how many individuals are contacting us and the types, I think it's premature for us to comment on exactly what those other lawsuits will look like. But I think the bottom line is we're coming.
How do you come up with, and I'm always fascinated by this, a sum of 51 million? I'm just curious if it's like 5.1 per client, and kind of how you came up with that number.
We have alleged damages of $5.1 million per client. That's where we're starting. We may amend this lawsuit and change that, increase that number. We're doing our best to evaluate how we think a jury will respond to this evidence. And ultimately, it's going to be members of our community who are in a jury who will decide how much is the pain and suffering that these people went through, these children went through, all alone, behind bars. How much is that worth? And I think the number could be much higher.
You've been doing this for a little bit, and this is, kind of your bread and butter, these kinds of lawsuits. From your experience, would you anticipate that this does go to a jury, or is this something that you think, given what you've seen, is going to result in a settlement?
Well, we're certainly going to be prepared to take the case all the way to a jury. And I think that's really going to depend on the state's decision on how they decide to respond to these cases. In recent years, for those of you who've been tracking, they've taken a certain approach to litigation involving, for example, foster care. We don't know how we don't know if they're going to repeat that, and that's going to be their choice. So we'll be ready, but I think it's important that the state understand that I think we as a community are watching. We're watching to see, are they going to start taking this seriously? And how they respond in this litigation is going to be a part of the answer to that question.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the comment you just made about your perspective of how they handle cases related to foster care? Like what did you mean there? Like, what are you anticipating as a possibility here?
I'll add a little bit to that because my bread and butter really is abuse of kids in DHS, so I have some experience there. But what we've seen on the foster care side in the last decade or so is this growing outrage about how foster care kids are treated. That culminated in a class action lawsuit that I wasn't involved in, so I don't know the details particularly well. But what I do know is that they hired out a big gun law firm to deal with that. That big gun law firm was paid, I think, $23 million. And I'm not sure, again, I wasn't a part of that process, but I'm not sure if it got them anywhere further down the road, when really what that class action lawsuit was looking for were systemic solutions. And it didn't feel like initially they were looking for systemic solutions, they were looking to defend against the lawsuit. And so I think the hope here is they try to find systemic solutions to this problem. And to be honest, what I see coming out in the last couple months and last year with reference to kids abused in juvenile facilities like OYAs is I see a growing outrage that reminds me of what happened with foster care. You're seeing more lawsuits come out. You have this lawsuit. You have, I feel like, articles in the papers every week. As we mentioned before, one just came out an hour ago about the number of abuse reports that went uninvestigated since 2018. So we're just trying to get, OIA has been touting for years how they are ahead of the curve in terms of fighting sexual abuse. And right now it feels like window dressing. And hopefully with this lawsuit, we can shed some light on this and get past the window dressing.
Someone online has a question.
Sure.
What does it mean for your clients to have this case being filed now?
It means a lot. It means a lot to our clients, and that's, the sentiments that we're hearing is that to be believed, to be heard, and to have somebody take it seriously and do something about this, and to demonstrate with actions that their lives matter and that what happened to them matters. It means a lot to them. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap things up. Appreciate it. Appreciate everyone's attention. Let me know if you have other questions. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.